Good morning, everyone. I'm Jamie Besants, the Visitor Engagement Coordinator at Soldiers Memorial Military Museum. Thank you for attending following the lead of the Tuskegee Airmen. So I have a few notes to get through before we get the program going. So first of all, safety is a top priority. So almost all of our public programs are virtual right now, but Soldiers Memorial Military Museum and the Missouri History Museum are both open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 5 p.m. We'd love for you to visit if you feel safe. We have a reduced capacity right now because of the pandemic, so we recommend that you pre-register online at mohistory.org for free tickets. Thanks to our members for their support. Your support allows us to put on programs like this. A few details about how the Zoom program is going to go. So this is going to be roughly a 30-minute presentation, and then we're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. If you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window rather than in the chat box, because I'm going to be looking in the Q&A box for those questions. We'll try to get to all of the questions, but if we don't get to yours because of time, apologies in advance. Today's presentation is being recorded, so if you want to watch it again or share it with someone, it should be posted on the Missouri Historical Society's YouTube channel within the next few days. And when the program ends, a short survey should open in your browser. We'd appreciate it if you take a couple times to give us feedback on this program. So with all that out of the way, once the program gets going, I'll put a few links in the chat about membership and the YouTube channel, but I'll let our speaker for today take it over. It's a retired Air Force Major Yolanda Wood, here representing Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. She's going to tell us a little bit about the Tuskegee Airmen's legacy, the work that Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. does, and some profiles of Tuskegee Airmen who were from the St. Louis area. So take it away, Major Wood.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, and I'm honored to be here. I learned about the Tuskegee Airmen while I was at the Air Force Academy in 1982 to 86. And when I left the Tuskegee Airmen, or I left the base, I went to my first duty station and I went to a military Black History Month event, and I was expecting a free meal. And I ran into the wife of an original Tuskegee Airman, and she goes, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "I'm a navigator." And she goes, "Do you know who these people are?" And I'm going like, "Not really." And she goes, "Give me a check for $35 and join our chapter." As a good lieutenant, I joined, and since 1986, I have been a member of Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated and have held a position of leadership on the national and the local level. So I'm very honored to be allowed to present to you the story of the Tuskegee Airmen and the Missouri History Museum presentation. And of course, what works when we get there now works a different way. So here's my topic: following the lead of the Tuskegee Airmen. I definitely am an example of following this. I want to thank our sponsors, McDonald's. I want to focus on the wind beneath the airmen's wings, because before any pilot arrived and took off, somebody had to build that flight line. Somebody had to put those airplanes together. Somebody had to build the tents that the airmen were going to stay at. Somebody had to pack their parachutes and keep track of their pay. And this is the focus on some of those people and the people that came from the St. Louis area. This is the chapter patch from the Tuskegee Airmen chapter, the Hugh J. White, which I'm a member of, and the national organization. Every pilot required ground support, every single one. So some of the airmen that we're going to talk about today came from St. Louis, and one of them shared the story about having to change an engine. And it wasn't the simple thing of getting an engine, screwing it back up, connecting a few wires. Engines arrived hermetically sealed, so they had to unwrap them, clean every port that was covered with some kind of goo. I'm sure there's a mechanical term for the goo, but as a girl, I'm just going to call it goo. They had to clean the engine, make sure all the parts were there, make sure all the equipment, because they were changing the aircraft outside because there were no hangars. So they had to have the hoist and the pulleys and everything else. Then they had to make sure that they had all the equipment to put the engine up and then take the other engine down and then make sure all the wires were connected. So it was not an easy job, and it was a constant struggle between the operations people who wanted airplanes and the mechanical people who had to fix them. And then you have to throw in the chow hall or mess hall, which might get a call after dinner was served to say, hey, crew chiefs are coming over, they need to be fed. And their response is, we just closed the kitchen and you still had to feed them. And my father says, you never mess with cooks. All of this, from the mechanics to the pilot, faced one obstacle. And most people may know about it. It was a 1925 War Department study that said Black folks cannot fix airplanes. They cannot fly airplanes. They just don't have the skill to do any of that. And so even though Tuskegee Airmen were trained at numerous bases and the ground support were trained at numerous bases, sometimes integrated with their white counterparts, they were never totally integrated. One Tuskegee Airman tells the story, his job was to learn how to change cloth on an airplane wing into a solid surface that wind would not go through. And when he went through training, there was a cordon around the airplane and an instructor on the side, on one side of the cordon. And he says, put this stuff on the airplane. Any questions? That gentleman who was trained to change cloth into an impervious surface never touched an airplane until he got to Tuskegee. And the stories that I found were just the same. People were shown how to fix an airplane from a distance, but they never, in a lot of cases, got to touch an airplane until they got to Tuskegee. And then sometimes they didn't get the training they had to learn as a team. Who were the Tuskegee Airmen? Almost 1,000 were trained as pilots. And the reason we say almost 1,000, because there were some Haitian pilots, there were some pilots who went overseas, there were some pilots who went into the bomber unit, there were some observation pilots. So it's just easy to say around 1,000. Some were volunteers, drafted. Numerous bases, 11 plus states had training in them. Men and women, we're going to tell some stories about them. Officer enlisted, civilian and military, high school and college graduates. One mechanic was told to go find 100 people who could be maintenance people. So he just walked the streets and tried to find people who were high school graduates so that he could train them to become the beginning crew at Tuskegee to fix airplanes. He figured if you've been graduate from high school, Air Force or Army Air Corps should be able to train you. Now, aviators, mechanics, technicians, all these people became part of the Tuskegee experience. For every pilot, it was 10 to 11 ground crew. And no pilot flew without a ground crew. And a lot of times we think of the red tail pilots and they did an awesome job, but they stood on the backs of the work of the ground crew on the field and off the field. Chanute Field in Illinois is where one of the bases they were trained for mechanics. Friedman Field, Michigan, Kentucky, Indiana, Texas, New York, Georgia, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Florida, Colorado, and California. Training occurred in multiple locations. Here's the story, and I just listed 4 names, but I wanted you to know that they came from all over the country. Cleveland, Indy, Los Angeles. I don't remember where Sergeant James Atchison came from, but they were all college students. They all, he actually came from California. I stand corrected. So they came and did multiple jobs. They became crew chiefs. They were trained at the factory bases where they built the airplane, and then they came and they had the responsibility to train all the people who would fix and maintain those airplanes in Tuskegee, in Moton Field, and in Italy and North Africa. Oops, I went too fast. In April 1941, the Black personnel who were enlisted converged at Chanute. So they converged in one of the major bases, which was Illinois. The challenge that some people don't think about is, how do you get from Illinois to Mississippi? You may have heard of the Green Book, but normally if they were transported by train, a major form of transportation back then, you might have gone from the north where there was no segregation into the deep south and had to maneuver in that world. And that world continued into the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. J.P. Morgan, who's the brother of an original Tuskegee Airman, told the story of how he had to hide and sit on the bottom of his car while he traveled across certain parts of Georgia from one base to another base because he could not be seen with another officer of a different race because it was unsafe. Off the field, Tuskegee Airmen filled all kinds of staff roles. We're going to tell the story of a 16-year-old and two ladies. I could not find any ladies from St. Louis, but just because of sheer numbers, there probably was a few. I'm hoping that we inspire some people to partner with us and do more research. The laundry section was led by a former principal and a college graduate, highly overqualified for the job. Quartermasters is another word for logistics and supply. All these people were required to do that job of putting an airplane in the air. These are just some of the nurses of World War II that were African American. In 1943, there was only 160 Black nurses in the Army Air Corps out of around 50,000. African American nurses were limited to treating POWs or German POWs and African Americans. So nurses are part of the unsung heroes that don't get told about. There were 56. There was a quota in 1941 of 56, got expanded to 160, and 25 were at Tuskegee. They made just like a young sergeant. They made around $338 a month, which was pretty good back then. Oh, there's my nurse. Major Nessie Lieutenant Cologne. She's still alive. Like most airmen, she's approximately 100 years old or coming close. She's a very active member in the Tuskegee Airmen organization, and she was actually the first female president of the organization. But she was one of the nurses that trained and flew. She was, well, didn't fly, but she was at Lockburn, one of the training bases in Ohio. One of the other ladies that I want to mention in passing is Callie Gentry. She's an active member of the Tuskegee Airmen, but she was a stenographer, and she provides an example of something else that the women did in World War II. She was not the only one. I found a story of a 16-year-old named Virginia Porter. She was from Texas, where they got their first big group of mechanics. She was 16 years old. She had to get permission from her mother and father to travel with these mechanics cross country to Tuskegee to go to work. And she became the bookkeeping clerical support. Being 16, she left as soon as she got married, but she served for a while. Callie Gentry served for longer. She was on staff as a stenographer to keep the records. The Army Air Corps had a unique situation in Tuskegee that made it difficult to be organized. They had civilian contractors who were working with the university and the Army to try to put together this unit. So there were multiple people in charge. And sometimes civilians would come and find all that chaos and they would just leave. They wouldn't, I have a job at home, I don't have to put up with this stuff. But those who stayed became the core of the Tuskegee Airmen experience. So women were part, and although they're not from St. Louis, I just have to put a plug in for the women. I keep pushing the wrong button on my. Some of the other people of prominence was Robert Scurlock. His pictures are actually on display at the National Museum of American History. So you can see all his archive photos, and he became prominent when he became home. So his photos chronicle the Tuskegee Airmen and their experience. And there's a lot of them out there. So if you're interested in photography, look this gentleman up. Here's the list of 39. The former president of the Tuskegee Airmen, the Hugh J. White chapter, which is William Curtis. He created this poster. He's a renowned artist, has had his art on display. But these are the ones that he was informed of. We are probably missing some. If you know one, help us to increase it. Most of the airmen from St. Louis came from Sumner or Vashon high schools. Another prominent artist in St. Louis is Solomon Thurman. And you should be aware of this mural, which is at Lambert. This is the section of the mural that is dedicated to the St. Louis Airmen. It includes Hugh J. White, Lewis Lynch, which we'll see pictures of, Christopher Newman, Clarence Shivers, Wendell Prue, and Everett Bratcher. All were included in this. When I met Solomon Thurman, he said, one of the ways you can figure out how important each individual is in this mural is how big their head is. So the bigger the person, the more full body, the more prominent displays. But Warren Harper is located here on the right-hand side. He was a mechanic. Of the St. Louis Airmen, we actually had 23 pilots who earned 7 Distinguished Flying Cross. 3 were killed, and 1 was a POW, and 10 were shot down. Now, these are some of the ground crew. We're going to talk about a few of them. George Carper, Walter Fielder, and Charles Harvey. I'm going to highlight. But before we highlight them, I need to introduce you to this gentleman. He was in the news a few years ago. I won't tell you why, but his name might spark an interest. Christopher Newman is from St. Louis. He is a documented original Tuskegee Airman. He served both in World War II and Korea because he was recalled. His claim to fame, and I don't know if I'll ever get in a car with him, is he got wounded in air combat and had to bail out of his airplane in the Adriatic. He bounced around the Adriatic for 6 hours before he was recovered or rescued. In both situations, this were 2 situations. It took him 2.5 months to recover from his first injury, less time to recover from being shot down. And in both situations, he actually went back and flew. So this is one dedicated, motivated individual. He graduated from Vashon and he attended Stowe Teachers College, which is now Harris Stowe Teachers University. So a lot of history back in here. He got hooked on flying when he was 5 years old, when he saw Charles Lindbergh flying and getting the attention. After the war, a lot of these men, they maintained some of their relationships. So this is Christopher Newman, Lewis Lynch, and Charles White. 2 of these gentlemen that I got to meet, and I was very happy. I'm going to talk about Lewis Lynch. He was a strong supporter of the St. Louis Science Museum. If the average age of a World War II vet is 98 years old or almost 100, it is not surprising that many of them have joined the Lonely Eagles flight. Lewis Lynch has passed away. So he flew 42 missions, and he was assigned at Scott Air Force Base in what was then Military Air Transport Service. This is a picture when I arranged for him to sign books at the library. Wendell Pruitt. He's on display in the Missouri History Museum. They had a housing area named after him. He has actually become the inspiration to my story I call Mama's Rules. When Wendell Pruitt was flying on one of his missions, on the way home, he saw a German destroyer. He had no bombs left, but he used 50 caliber bullets, which are around this big around and this long, very small, and he strafed that ship. The result would be that ship would have to be scuttled because it was so highly damaged. When I tell the story to children and old folks alike, I tell it as Mama's Rules. Always, always try and do it now. And because Wendell Pruitt tried to damage a ship and the Germans had not put their ammunition away, on that day, history was made. No ship has ever had to be scuttled or destroyed based on a 50 caliber bullet. And that was from a man from St. Louis, Missouri. Everett Bratcher. He had transitioned and was living at the Missouri Veterans Home with one other Tuskegee Airman who just passed away. Everett Bratcher enlisted at Jefferson Barracks. He actually had a pilot's license in 1941. He flew as a fighter pilot and ended up as a mechanical and maintenance operations or an armament and chemical officer. So he had multiple jobs in the military. He continued to motivate youth by flying with the Scott Air Force Base Aero Club when he was in force. George Carper. Now, George Carper loved chocolate shakes. He was a mechanic. He graduated from Sumner. His family was Carper Casket Company, so he made a significant influence in the African-American community. He was honored by a whole bunch of funeral people. I've never seen a banquet so well attended, and everybody wanted to meet him. He tells a story about Hugh J. White and him in the Deep South. You have to imagine this. He always likes to tell the story. In the Deep South, in the middle of the night, he's driving with Hugh down a country road, finds a peach stand, and they decide to stop. And Hugh decides he wants to find some peaches. So Hugh takes bites of these peaches, and they're not sweet enough. So he's putting them down, taking a bite of another peach. And the farmer's not exactly a little happy with this man taking bites of all his peaches. And not something you do as an African-American in the middle of the night, in the middle of a place where you could disappear. They ended up at base with bushels of peaches because he had to buy a whole bunch. But George Carper says, you couldn't hang out with Hugh without possibly getting in trouble. He went to Tuskegee as a maintenance person. He also wanted to fly, but he was such a well-skilled crew chief that they didn't allow him in the pilot program because they needed him to maintain the aircraft. Robert Fredericks, tail end of the Tuskegee Airmen experience, he helped support the Tuskegee Airmen as a vital member before he passed away of the Hugh J. White chapter. Here's Hugh himself, young and old, graduated from Sumner, Stowe. You're noticing a trend of where our airmen were trained and educated. He passed the bar and actually served as the Missouri legislative. That is another point that a lot of people don't realize. When these Tuskegee Airmen, men and women, came home, they went on to continue to serve in multiple roles. And as a lawyer and a legislator, he did a good job. Now, there could be a certain daughter who is an heritage member of this gentleman. I got to listen to a lot of stories about him, and that was kind of fun. So this is Dr. Ward. I'm missing a quotation mark, I apologize. When he was a sophomore in college, he took the test to become a pilot. He scored the third highest. He got deferred so he could finish his schooling, but before he finished his schooling, he got called on active duty. He got called on active duty, started his pilot training. the Tuskegee Airmen will tell you there was a quota. I've talked about the quota in the nursing. There was also a quota in the pilots. People who took the test, you couldn't be better than, well, let's just say white folk. So we didn't want to have better performance in the Tuskegee Airmen experience, which was supposed to fail. Dr. Ward did well. He got lost one time and had to land. And so he had to call the base because once you landed your airplane, you couldn't take off again. And he finally got back to the base. And if you listen to one of his videos, you'll see that he also had a forced landing. And when you're learning how to fly an airplane, they'll give you all kinds of situations. And one of them was, hi, your engines have just quit. Where can you land? And you're supposed to look to the left, look to the right, behind you, and says, if my airplane actually crashed and didn't work, I would land right over there. And the pilot would probably, instructor would say, good job. Well, one day he was flying and his engine did quit. He theorized that because the engines were fixed outdoors, water could have got into the engine and caused it to stall. But as he looked to the left and he looked to the right, he found a cornfield with 6 to 7 feet tall corn. And he goes, that looks like a good place to land. His instructor pilot was very impressed with his ability to land the airplane. I don't know if the farmer was that impressed with the chop job that was handled on his corn. But he eventually came back, earned his bachelor's and his master's degree, taught in the middle school and a high school. And then when he did some summer school teaching in Baton Rouge, they liked him so much that the university hired him to become a full-time instructor. Warren Harper. I'm including him. He was a mechanic. He's in the Lambert mural, but he's an example of the humility of a Tuskegee Airman. Because I can talk to his son and says, what did your father tell you? Well, I know my father was a mechanic, but I think he did more admin because he's not exactly mechanically inclined. And I know he went to Italy. And that's about it. And I have met over 250 original Tuskegee Airmen, many that have passed away. And you would really have to poke them to get them to tell you their story. They weren't trying to make history. They were trying to serve their nation. And for them, it was their job. It was their responsibility. It wasn't something extraordinary. It was just right. And so a lot of times, if you see someone who's a Tuskegee Airman, you have to pull the story out of them. Clarence Shivers is from St. Louis. He's an artist, and he's an active artist. One of the things the Tuskegee Airmen wanted to do was build a statue, but they couldn't get a plan together. So he actually figured out how to do a cast statue and figured out how to cast it. This statue is at the Air Force Academy. This is how I got introduced to the Tuskegee Airmen. I needed to learn the quote on the bottom of the statue. That was the only information that the cadets at the Air Force Academy got. There's a statue at the Air Force Academy which says this. That was our introduction. Charles Harvey is from St. Louis. He was a member of the Hugh J. White chapter. He was a radio operator with the bombing group. And many people don't know that Tuskegee Airmen actually trained as bomber pilots and bomber crew members. But due to the ending of the war, they never got to go to combat. Now I'm going to end with a story. I think I'm on track about achievement versus recognition. Is there a difference? And the answer is yes. Many people know about Tom Cruise and Top Gun. And the question is, who won the first Top Gun? Did you say the Tuskegee Airmen? If you didn't, you weren't paying attention. Because that's what I've been talking about. The 332nd actually won the first gunnery competition in 1949. Two of the people are still alive today, Harvey and Stewart. They went down to Las Vegas, they flew in that category, and they took top honors. They received their trophy and were sent home. For 40 years, the Air Force Almanac said first place unknown. Soon after they went home with the trophy, the Air Force desegregated and the 332nd was disbanded. So this pilot went here, this pilot went there, all of them going different places. And the trophy said, hey, no problem. I got it. I'll watch it. And it was buried. It took a historian 4 years to track it down, but I'm glad to say it is now on display at Wright-Patterson in the museum. So for 40 years, we did not recognize the achievement, of the Tuskegee Airmen Top Gun team. That team included pilots and ground crew. So we didn't recognize their achievement, but they still achieved. And that's one of the legacies that I share with individuals about the Tuskegee Airmen. We are now getting to the point where we are recognizing their achievement. And that achievement needs to expand past the pilots, to the parachute packers, to the admin, to the cooks, to the maintenance, to the people who got the airplane in the sky. And there are a lot of stories back there. One of the Tuskegee Airmen from Detroit is named Alexander Jefferson. He had to jump out of his airplane or fall out, however you want to think about it. He relied on a parachute and it worked. When he came back stateside, Alexander Jefferson tells the story that he ran into the young lady who packed his parachute. And if you're romantic like me, you now know what happened. Yep, they got married. So there's a lot of love stories in there that have been told or need to be told about the Tuskegee Airmen, about their achievement, and we need to recognize them. My hope is that this will inspire you all to read more, to find out more. And if you know someone who's a Tuskegee Airman or served, gather their information so that the Missouri History Museum or a local chapter can gather it and hold on to it so that we can tell their stories later on. I've included some of the resource materials that I have. I have a big library of books, but also I've included some YouTubes on Walter Fielder. The world is small. Walter Fielder actually went to the church that my grandparents went to, and they tell the story of Walter Fielder. George Carper, he was interviewed at the Missouri Veterans Home, but at 2012, he's getting a little bit old. We're missing some of his story. And Dr. Ward's is an awesome interview by Soldiers Memorial. These are just a few of the interviews that are there. And in the perfect world, I would be able to find every interview on an airman, put them in a portfolio with all their news articles so that the next generation can understand the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen and use that legacy to inspire the next generation to excel. So I'm probably out of words and I'm ready for questions, and I hope there's some out there.
Thank you, Major Wood. As a reminder to the audience, if you do, we don't have any audience questions yet. If you do have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box. You should be able to access that from the bottom of your Zoom window. That's going to be the best place for us to find your questions. While we're waiting for audience questions to roll in, I had a question. You told the story of Wendell Pruitt hitting the magazine on the German destroyer and causing it to need to be scuttled. I know that action was recognized with Captain Wendell O. Pruitt Day here in St. Louis. There was a photo on that slide from the ceremony. And I guess my question is, there's such like a disconnect, it feels like, between, you know, the military is still segregated at this time, and it wasn't desegregated until after the war. The housing complex that you mentioned that was half named, it's called the Igo Pruitt, right, because it was originally meant to be segregated with the Igo section for whites and the Pruitt section for blacks. And so maybe it's just my like 2020 perspective having trouble looking backwards, but it seems so strange to me that, you know, a horribly underfunded, you know, public housing project is meant to be segregated in the future, like that hasn't happened yet. But then there's kind of this ceremonial recognition of Captain Pruitt. I mean, did that reflect changing attitudes? that weren't widespread yet? Was it meant to muster Black support for the war effort? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, here, and I've got one of your questions about the book, and he'll answer the question on presentation. Even during the war, when I told you there was so much chaos between the leadership, because Tuskegee University is training in a segregated environment. African-American press is saying, we don't want segregation, we want equality. So we've got dichotomy there. We're fighting for a double victory, a victory abroad and a victory at home to end segregation. Many of the pilots who came home and were trained could not get a job in the civilian Air Force. One of the leaders of the current organization actually is a mechanic in an organization that the namesake of his chapter couldn't get a job in after the war because he was Black. And 40 years later, now he's got a job. So we're still working with it, this double victory of, well, do we want to give you credit? And if we give you credit, can we give you credit but hide you? I mean, one of the things that happened in the war was for a long period of time, Benjamin O. Davis got called back to Congress and says, you're not shooting down airplanes. You're just proof, you're a failure. Well, they were in North Africa, so far away from the front lines that there was nobody to shoot down. And so there's an awesome line in the Tuskegee Airmen movie. We just want an opportunity to show you what we can do, a fair chance. And so that's what they want. And that's what they'll continually, repeatedly, over and over do in housing, in law, in every career field that they stood up for, they would end up having to face that challenge. The seminal book on the Tuskegee Airmen is this one by Charles Francis, The Men Who Changed the Nation. I actually have like 3 or 4 copies of this because my copy is autographed, but my original copy, which is my #1 possession, is signed by over 200 original Tuskegee Airmen. I went to a convention in 1987, my first convention, and I was wearing my uniform and they said, who are you? And I'm like, I'm the navigator. And one of them told me to go buy a book. And I'm like, I don't want to buy a book. I just finished college. Why do I want to buy a book? So I bought one of these books and they actually ended up taking it from me and getting signatures. And it has over 200 signatures of the original book. It never, if I show it to you, I'm like, don't touch. Look, but don't touch. But this is one of my books of that version. My book is actually one of the original earlier copies, and it has a man listed as missing in action. And he signed my book. That was corrected in a later copy. So that would be, will there be another reunion in St. Louis in the near future? The next reunion will probably be in San Antonio. That's where it was supposed to be last year, but it ended up being virtual. And we try to go from the West Coast to the Central and to the East Coast. We've had it twice in St. Louis. If we want to have it again in St. Louis, what would end up happen is you got to have to join my chapter. So whoever you are, join my chapter because I need staff. I'm not going to do it all by myself just so you can come and play. But if you ever can go to a convention, and you can always go just as a visitor, you know, buy a ticket for a banquet, you need to, because there's only around 12 to 15 that come to the convention, maybe up to 20. If they're able to come, they will go to convention. And if you ever wanted to meet a whole bunch of them, that's the only way you're going to meet a whole bunch is at convention. What else do I want to tell you? There was something. It'll come to me as soon as this presentation's over.
Of course, that's how it goes. One question.
I know. Really quick. So for all of you that are out there, one of the things that the Tuskegee Airmen do, we have a national scholarship for high school students, $1,500 just based on financial need and GPA. So you can go to the local chapter for scholarships. We have an aviation STEM program. Last year or the year before, we got to select one kid to go to a 3-week camp for free to learn how to solo. So there's lots of opportunities like that for everything from 6th graders on up to college students. And hopefully when COVID calms down, we'll do it again. This year, I got 5 applications for scholarships. Normally I get around 20. Each of those applicants that were qualified got sent forward, and hopefully they'll get $1,500 or a possible $5,000 scholarships. So you can always contact the Hugh J. White chapter to find out more opportunities to continue the legacy. All right, back to you, Jamie.
Thank you. I think one of these questions was, how can I get a copy of this presentation? So the recording of this video will be posted in the Missouri Historical Society's YouTube page. I put a link in the chat. As far as the slides themselves, I don't think that those will be kind of publicly available anywhere unless Major Wood does something I don't know about.
Well, if somebody wants them and they're not going to complain about the typos that I have on the notes section, because on the notes section, which you guys don't see, is I have the bios of Chris Newman and some of the other gentlemen, my little, chicken scratch notes, they're in there. But you can contact the Hugh J. White chapter and say, can I have a copy of the PowerPoint slides? And then maybe I'll send it to you a PDF. That way you can't change them and put some weird stuff in there and then say I said it, because I didn't say it. So we'll work on it. If you contact the Hugh J. White chapter, I can give you the slides.
We had a question about the Eleanor Roosevelt story.
Oh, yes. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt was really cool. She's a key factor in supporting the Tuskegee Airmen. She flew with a guy named Chief Anderson, who was actually, when he was 5 years old, he wanted to learn how to fly an airplane. And he actually taught himself how to fly an airplane. There's a really good story that I shared with some kids. And so she went down to Tuskegee, Alabama to see what this was all about. And she got into an airplane with Chief Anderson, which was not allowed. White women do not get into a car or a plane or anything with a black man unless he's wearing a chauffeur hat. Secret Service tried to get it to say, we'll give you a flight with a white man later on. Eleanor would have none of that. That picture went around the world and was publicized. And soon thereafter, the Tuskegee Airmen were sent into combat from initially to North Africa and then eventually into Italy. So yeah, she played a key role and was an avid supporter of civil rights. Awesome question.
I think we're through the audience questions so far. Maybe we can give it just a minute to see whether any more come through. Thank you for telling us about the scholarships. That was actually going to be one of my questions, was can you tell us a little bit about your organization, Tuskegee Airmen, Inc., and the work that you do? So I know you sponsor kids to be able to go to these kinds of programs. Do you organize any programs yourselves?
We've had regional camps here where we partner with Scott Air Force Base so the kids can stay in the TLFs, which are temporary living facilities, where we can put like 5 kids in a bedroom. So we have a girl's house and a boy's house. We've done that in the past. Our goal right now, because of COVID, is we really want to do a monthly program. And so we've got one that's coming in April. There's a young lady, Ebony Brown, who's doing a program with NASA, and she's going to come back and do a presentation. But what we'd like to do is every month have a Zoom meeting, or when we get outdoors, have an activity where we fly rockets or learn how to do drones or aviation, all kinds of cool stuff. We're looking for partners. And then we've worked with the Gateway Eagles to make sure that kids can get a flight. And there's a reason why you want your kids to fly an airplane. I don't care if they never want to fly an airplane or be a pilot. When they fly an airplane, here's the #1 reason. When you fly an airplane, anybody on the ground is about this big, and they live in a house this big. So when they say, well, Dad, I can't, there's a bully. You're like, how big is a person? This big. If you look at where you're going instead of at the obstacles in your life, you can get there. And when you fly in an airplane, you get automatic feedback. You drop your nose, your plane goes down. You lift so there's feedback, and everybody says they can't wait long enough to figure out what's going to happen. Fly an airplane. Immediate feedback can be a lesson that you can translate into real life.
Thank you. Would you be willing to post the website for your local Tuskegee Airmen Inc. chapter? It's the Hugh J. White chapter, right?
All they have to do is look for Tuskegee Airmen STL.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's see. I don't know how to get out of this one. 4 more questions. Let's see.
All right. I
Worth a
got
visit
it
to.
in the
Oh,
chat.
yes. Website for your local chapter. Look for Tuskegee Airmen STL. You should be able to find me. It's the Hugh J. White. We're the only ones there. And there's a link there where you can contact me. Is it worth a visit to the Tuskegee Museum in Alabama? If you can find it, if there's not very many road signs for it, yes, it is. Because they have rebuilt most of the buildings or the framework for the buildings. They've got a new, really good museum there. And if you go into the Flightline buildings, if you walk through some of the doors, they're motion activated and they're like, welcome to the briefing. And so it's really interactive. I really enjoyed my visit down there.
Well, we've, because we have time, would you be willing to tell us about the Freeman Field?
Oh,
Museum?
yes.
I think that's a really great Tuskegee story.
The Freeman Field Mutiny. I could go get the book. So one of the things about the Tuskegee Airmen is the segregation. So when they got trained, or they were starting an Army, a bomber unit, they got transferred to a lot of different bases in this process, because sometimes the white leaders caused trouble. But so they ended up in Freeman Field, and the Army Air Corps was supposed to be desegregated. So they got to the unit, and the first thing they did was they said, well, the officers club is for officers who are trained, and you're in student status, so you can't play with us. All right, we're going to make some laws up. And eventually the trainers of those cadets came down, who were also African Americans, and tried to integrate an integrated club. The commander was having none of that. So he blocked the entrance. 3 of the airmen bumped the sergeants, the police officers in front, and they were charged actually. One of them would eventually get a felony charge and a $100 fine for assault. 40 years later, I was with him when his record got cleared, and the government gave him his $100 back, no interest. But what was critically important about it is 104 people were actually restricted behind Constantine wire because they refused not once, but twice to follow the lawful orders of their commander. By refusing to follow a lawful order during wartime, they did face court-martial and execution, because you have to follow a lawful order. So their lives were on the lines. Black press got a hold of it and helped fight against them. But because they kept on being moved around, they never were militarily ready to go into combat. So that bomber unit never did. So 103 people were restricted. 103 did not sign the law that said, or the regulation says, we have read the regulations, we will try not to integrate. Their refusal to sign could have resulted in them being shot. Luckily, they weren't shot, but one of them was charged. And for 40 years, his job opportunities were limited because of this charge. If you get to see the Tuskegee Airmen HBO movie and you look at the graduation of the first class, you'll see a gentleman in the middle with a long black jacket. That is an original Tuskegee Airman. He spent 10 years making that movie with, trying to get somebody to make that movie with Lucasfilms. So it's one of those critical stories. And the other story is there is a segment in there where they land in front of a chain gang. Well, they didn't really land in front of a chain gang, but it would have been very non-Hollywood to have the Tuskegee Airmen who actually landed at a military base one time unscheduled. Everybody came out to see the airplane. They're like, wow, cool airplane. And he's got his mask on, his helmet on, his gloves on, Deep South, scarf. And they're like, don't you want to take off your mask? No, that's okay. Finally, like, mister, take it off. He finally took it off. They're like, ah, did you steal this airplane? And so they put him in a bread truck, kept him by himself, fixed his airplane, snuck him back out, told everybody not to tell it was a black man who flew, and strongly suggested that he never return. So there's a lot of stories about Tuskegee Airmen that are not known. And if you just do a little bit of research or invite me to your elementary school, your high school, I'll share some of them with you.
One of the part of what I wanted to ask about the Freeman Field mutiny, I think it's a great story, and it reminds me a little bit of one of the stories in the World War II section of our exhibit at Soldiers Memorial. Talks about racial discrimination in the war industries here in St. Louis. And that if I'm remembering right, there was federal guidance that war industries, where people lobbied to say that there wasn't supposed to be discrimination in the war industries, but then local industries discriminated anyways, and there were protests against that. And what's really interesting to me about the similarity that I see in that story and in the Freeman Field story is that the official rules was that there wasn't supposed to be discrimination, there wasn't supposed to be segregation, but there was discrimination and segregation anyways. And then the people who pointed that out and said, let's not do that, we're not supposed to be doing that anyway, they were the ones who felt the pressure to to fall in line, right?
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely.
And so that's always kind of amazing to me, looking at these stories.
Warren, you had a great story. One of the gentlemen you're probably referring to is now Brigadier General Charles McGee. Charles McGee actually has the record for more combat missions in combat than anybody else. He has over 100 combat missions in World War II. He has a whole 100 combat missions in Korea, and he has over 100 missions of combat in Vietnam. So Korea, Vietnam, and World War II, he flew in all of them. President Trump recognized, he was a colonel until a couple years ago. He got recognized and promoted to Brigadier General. He was the one that at the last Super Bowl that was in person, there was 4 World War II veterans. He's the one that got up because he's a Tuskegee Airman. He got up with his red jacket, red tail, red jacket, and flipped the coin at the Super Bowl. So he's been in the news, and he's got to fly some airplanes. He's done a lot of interviews. He's a lot of times the face that we see in the Tuskegee Airmen, and we're very proud of him. I know him and his daughter, but he is just the point of the spear. There are other ones that were intelligence officers, crew members that did the job, that helped support him, and that are just as much of heroes. And there are women who, in some cases, packed their parachutes to make sure that they came home safely.
All right. Let's wrap it up there. Could I get the closing slide, please? Thank you. So thanks again to Major Wood for speaking with us today. I also want to thank again our sponsor, McDonald's. They're actually sponsoring all of Missouri Historical Society's Black History Month programming. So thanks to them. Like I mentioned in the intro, when you close out the webinar, there should be a short survey in your browser. We'd appreciate it if you take a couple minutes to give us feedback on this program. We do several St. Louis History Live programs each month. Oh dear, I have the dates wrong here, I'm sorry. So the next program is called Finding Your Folk. It's about genealogy research. That will be February 25th, Thursday, February 25th at 6:30 p.m. And then the next program is going to be March 2nd at 11 a.m. It's the kickoff to Women's History Month. It's called Continuing the Legacy of Empowering Missouri Women. So those will both be online. You can find those links at mohistory.org/events. So we'd look forward to seeing you there if you're able to attend. And with that, see everyone in the next one. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Mike.